David, welcome back. How are you, sir?
Hey, doing fantastic, friend. How about yourself?
Doing very well. Always a joy having you. All right, talk to us about tariffs. There's talk all over the news, of course. You know where Donald Trump stands on a lot of these things. What say you?
Well, what's just happened today has been the biggest thing that we could ever talk about as it relates to tariffs. And so ultimately, President Trump has made a declaration that we're going to charge the exact same tariff as any other nation is going to charge us.
Yep,
ultimately
I read that.
Stating that, if you got, you want to do business with us, we're not going to let you have, 18% charging us and only we get 2.5%. And so this is just obviously not a fair thing. And so ultimately this gives us the opportunity to negotiate either for better rates or to be bringing people back here to the United States to work and getting more jobs back home.
Yeah, one of those things that you just mentioned was, ethanol, which I didn't know we even imported ethanol. Have no idea why we even import ethanol, but we export it at about a 2.5% tariff to Brazil. But when we have it coming back in, it's an 18%, to your point a moment ago, tariff. I mean, honestly, David, that's a load of crap.
In most cases, it's a vastly different number. And so this is how policy has ultimately been. And so now we're looking at a proposal. I think, the average person looking at this would probably say, but there's probably some way that people are going to get harmed. And one of the things that's important to note is that there's just going to be a study that's done here initially that's finished up on April 1st. And then there's going to be a 180-day time frame beyond that that's going to look at different impacts on other nations, including our own, because there may be some impacts. And, the big concern is, well, is this going to bring the price of inflation up and everything else? Trump's comment to that is the only thing that's going to go up is the amount of jobs.
Right.
And if I can just even be honest with you right now, we've continued to have conversations about how dishonest, the government numbers have been on inflation. And if we got a second, I'd love to even share with you what just came out 2 days ago.
Yeah, go for it. Absolutely. Go for it, David.
So it's amazing. So we just got these inflation numbers that came out, and so it surprised to the upside just slightly. So it came in at 2.9. Well, I'm not as interested in looking at the government numbers because, number one, they're not basing their expenses or the amounts that are being calculated here based upon what the average person is doing. So this is more or less called CPI, not CPI.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with what you spend. Two, it's using a very outdated old system that's a month in arrears. Here's what my answer to this is. Trueflation.com gives you daily access to information. It's going up and down. But the point here is 1 month ago, we were looking at 3.3% inflation year over year as it's measured by Trueflation. Do you know that within 1 month, it has dropped to 2.06%? The reason for this is because when Donald Trump got into office, he actually was anti-inflationary because he made capitalism work better. Capitalism brings inflation out of the system. It's the only thing that brings prices down. Right. And so supply-side economics is actually working. 1 month's notice, 1% difference.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. Right now, they're telling us we're at 2.06%.
That's exactly right. So 2.06 is actually saying this is the rate of change over the last year because of what we're seeing. And if you follow what the trend has been, basically the pump and dump with the oil and everything else, it was like in September that we got to the low and the inflation started to creep back up. And then we saw it just radically fall off a cliff here, over the last month or, since everything has been, heading in a specific direction. So I'm encouraged by this.
Yeah, because and really quick, to your point, David, if you look at Trueflation, the downward trend that we're on, and granted, to your point, this is a day-by-day thing. And the question I guess I have for you, and you may laugh at me on this or you may disagree with me on this, but can you get the Fed, can you get Jerome Powell to actually read this stuff?
Well, I think that he's going to be audited here at some point, and I think that we should be asking questions of the system. And so I'm very critical of numbers and figures that we make big decisions off of. And what's amazing, though, is that all these adjustments have come. These headline numbers from the government have been inaccurate time after time after time. And yet we still haven't fired these people that are either still saying that this is a good idea or figured out that we just need to scrap that entire system and basically have a national debate on what would be a better way. And so I think that there's a lot of things that we're talking about. This is, why you and I think, get along so well, is because I think it should relate back to we the people. How are people doing better or worse as a result of the economic decisions that are being made?
Yeah, and I've said this before here of late. Jerome Powell, I think, missed a huge opportunity. And by the way, a quarter point down, David, isn't going to change much one way or the other when it's all said and done, other than the confidence and the signal that it actually sends out. Jerome, though, is rather he's rather sitting on the sideline saying, "Oh, we're just going to wait and see what happens. We'll see what these tariffs actually do. We'll see what some of these cuts do that Doge is working on, and so on." I know I'm paraphrasing David, but essentially, I'm going to be that sideline judge in the game that just kind of observes. I'm not going to make any calls. I'm not the back judge. I'm not the head referee. I'm not going to make any real calls right now. We're just going to sit back and wait and watch what happens. And I think he missed a huge opportunity to not lower rates even just a quarter of a point, knowing that it's not going to affect much of anything one way or the other when it's all said and done, David. But the reality is he has room to move and didn't.
He does have room, and he's in a really tricky spot. I'll just be clear because, no one had a real perspective of what the economy was going to do at the beginning of 2024. Because we didn't even know who the two candidates were ultimately going to be, right? And so, here we are as we get into 25, and now we do have a direction. But what's incredible is he's completely flipped his soft landing narrative and how he was approaching it, just in the last couple of months. Well, the difference is that we've got a very pro-growth economy. He just cut 1% into things while we're sitting here at all-time highs. And so, the market's overheated in certain ways. And then at the same time, well, shoot, if we start growing from this place and we're just in a higher environment going forward, then higher inflation is just going to be met with, we're going to be growing in a bigger way.
Right.
And so, Jerome Powell's stuck in a rock and a hard place. I feel like he's lost control.
He has.
And
really quick, David, I want to stop you for a moment because I'm going to back up all the way to 2020 when I was talking. We weren't talking at that time, but I was talking on air about his transitory inflation not being transitory was very real. I was calling for interest rate hikes way back when, knowing what was coming. Not that I have any kind of a crystal ball or that I'm any kind of a high-end economic advisor, because I'm not, David. I'm just a regular old Main Street guy that owns a business and coaches other businesses. But you could see what was coming. And the reality is they were too late to the game. They didn't have the same control that they should have had at that point, or they didn't have the control they should have had at that point in time. And they, for sure, I agree with you, they do not have control right now. And I've said this for years now, the amount of tools in the toolbox at the Fed has changed dramatically from what it was years ago, because the reality is it's way bigger than what it was back then. And they just don't have the same power they used to have.
Couple things. So the Fed has been able to drop interest rates in a meaningful way since September 1981, when Paul Volcker stopped the last rate hiking cycle.
Right.
When Arthur Burns dropped it, and then inflation came back, and it took a guy jacking things way up. Well, Fed's been able to just make things cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, relatively speaking. And just like yourself, even though you and I weren't talking back then, we were literally saying the same things. And so that's very interesting to point out, because if we put on our 2020 vision glasses and we look at pre-2020, post-2020, I think that there's a lot of things in contrast that logic tells us, well, we can see that this shouldn't have been like this. We were in good prospering times. We shouldn't have had all this extra, aid that was going on with mortgages and whatever else.
That's right.
So, if the Fed was actually acting independently, maybe it would have made different choices or whatever. And the point is, we're in a place right now of reckoning. And so I don't know how the world is sold all these ideas of change. But my goodness, I think that as a taxpayer, I'm pretty excited to recognize that in 24 days, Doge already cut $89 billion, exposed all sorts of fraud that you're like, really, we're doing this? And so the point here is this. We are cleaning house right now. This is a great time for America. This is a great time for us to be asking those questions. And I do believe the Fed has been wrong. They got some real important decisions in front of them, but I think it ultimately comes to the market's going to have some tricky times here, as things are getting figured out. But ultimately, it's going to be strong long term.
One last thing before I let you go, David. What do you feel, speaking of Doge, all the cuts that are happening, the amount of federal workers that we may end up losing when it's all said and done, which, by the way, I believe there's about twice as many as there should be. When it's all said and done, what do you feel Doge, and the cuts that they're making will do economically speaking?
Well, there's going to be positives and negatives, but here's the point. If your outgo exceeds your income, your upkeep will be your downfall. If you're going broke, step one is to take account of what's going on. We got to go line by line through this sucker. This is the biggest budget in the world. And guess what we found? There's a whole bunch of misuse and abuse. We knew it was there. Mm-hmm. Everyone knew it was there. None of us are really surprised, but we're really actually surprised if we read it and look a little bit deeper. The point here is this. We are in a time right now that the world is changing, and I think that it's an excited time to continue to talk about it and continue to have these national conversations. But we have to be vigilant and not find ourselves, just condemning everything or falling apart in some particular ways. We have to make sure that we can recognize the moment that we're in. And the last thing I just want to say is that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act 2.0 has essentially been unleashed on our economy. And this is very important for you to say right now, and that is the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, single greatest opportunity in any of our adult lifetimes to reduce or eliminate taxes. It's getting extended. There's bigger moments inside of this, and there's growth policy. Roth conversions, contributions. This is literally the thing that we've got to be looking at right now because, in the future, who knows what taxes are going to look like. But this is where we are today. Tax diversification is going to lead the way.
Good point. David, I always appreciate your Sound Planning Group. Thank you very much, sir.
Hey, appreciate you, John.
You're very welcome, David. Have a great night. Again, Sound Planning Group. You can find him by just Googling that. Great guy. Love talking to David, by the way. Always has good things to say.